Hello, fellow kids, and welcome to What is Politics? When we look outside at the world around us, and we go through recorded history, almost everywhere we look, we see human societies made up of dominance hierarchies. Some people have more wealth and more power than other people, and the people with wealth and power get to boss around and dominate the people without the wealth and without the power against their will. Think about the ranks in an army, or else the ranks in a corporation. The CEO gets paid more than the middle managers, who get paid more than the lower managers, who get paid more than the lower level employees, and authority also goes down in the same order, and the whole hierarchy exists in the first place to serve the interests of the owners. Most of recorded history is about kings and aristocrats lording over and exploiting serfs and peasants, or masters lording over and exploiting slaves, or business owners lording over and exploiting employees. In every era, the mechanisms and excuses and legitimation of dominance hierarchies are a bit different. But in just about every case, dominance hierarchy happens because some people are able to control property and resources like food, shelter, money, which other people depend on to live. And if you control a resource, you also control everyone who depends on that resource. Henry Kissinger said, if you want to control the people, control the food. And when you control a resource, you can make people who depend on that resource render you services in exchange for that resource. Your boss gets to tell you what to do 40 plus hours a week because he owns the business that generates the profits that pay your salary and the wages that you need to survive, to pay your rent, to your landlord who owns the house that you live in and that you depend on for shelter. Now, there were dominance hierarchies before the advent of the state. But when the state comes into being, it starts as a mechanism, or else it very quickly turns into a mechanism for people with power and control over resources to consolidate and protect their dominance over everybody else. It's only a recent time since the French Revolution, really, and especially after World War II, that the state becomes somewhat hijacked by the general public and democratized, where the people without resources can band together and impose their will and some restrictions over those who do own and control the resources. That's why your boss might be able to tell you what to do all day, but he can't tell you to have sex with him. Or there's a limit to how little your boss can pay you, or how many hours he can make you work, and some of the things he can make you do. All this to say that if you looked outside your window, and you looked at your life and the lives of the people throughout recorded history, you might think, as most people probably do, that humans are by nature a hierarchical species, like chimpanzees. The strong bully and exploit the weak, and the weak serve the strong. That's just the law of nature, right? And it seems that our hunger for more wealth and more power is just absolutely infinite. There's no limit to the levels of wealth accumulation and exploitation that people with power will engage in when they have the chance. You can look at the many horrors of the colonial era, or the slave trade around the world throughout history. Or just recently, look at the absolutely disgusting orgy of greed that the US Congress passed called the Big Beautiful Bill. Basically, they threw 17 million people off of their health care and took food out of the mouths of old poor people so that people with hundreds of millions and billions of dollars could get just a little bit more money that they'll never even notice that they had. So it would seem from all this that our nature is obviously to be organized into dominance hierarchies. But things aren't always as they seem. Humans have been around for about 300,000 years or so, and for most of that time, until about 12,000 years, give or take, most human societies, not all, but most, were nomadic hunter-gatherers following big game and living from the meat and also from various small animals and fruits and nuts and various things that they gathered along the way. And some anthropologists have called these societies immediate return hunter-gatherers because they basically consume what they eat pretty soon after collecting or hunting it. And basically every immediate return hunter-gatherer society that anthropologists have ever encountered, and also people other than anthropologists have encountered, like Jesuit priests writing about their encounters with people in North America in the 1600s, all of these societies that people have encountered all over the world and at different times, they've all been extremely egalitarian. There are no chiefs in these societies. There are no priests who have any authority over everyone. Elders in hunter-gatherer bands don't dominate younger people the way that they do in many other kinds of traditional tribal subsistence societies. Shamans don't have any special authority because the spirits that these societies believe in don't have any special authority. Their religions are kind of as egalitarian and as individualistic as the people are. A hunting party will choose a team leader who's skilled and admired, who has good leadership skills, but his, or sometimes her, authority, depending on the type of hunting they do, disappears as soon as the party returns from the hunt. And the hunt leader's authority might even disappear on the hunt if the other hunters don't want to follow him anymore. And in these societies, men and women are extremely equal, or else very close to it. Husbands don't have any special authority over their wives, and men who abuse or try to dominate women will be punished by her relatives or by the women's ritual association. Men and women have special gendered ritual political associations that sort of keep the power balance from going too far in the direction of either gender. And those who try to dominate or abuse anyone, including other men, will be punished and chased out of town if their behavior is really egregious. For example, Jerome Lewis tells the story of how the Women's Ritual Association in the Mbengele hunter-gatherer group that he lived in, they banished the best male hunter from their camp because he refused to take a break from hunting and let other guys take the lead a bit and gain their own prestige. He was an excellent hunter, and the women thought that if he kept doing all the hunting, this would lead to him having too much arrogance and too much prestige and too much influence in the group, and they asked him repeatedly to stop and take a break, but he refused because he just loved hunting, and so they ran him out of town. And in these societies, parents don't even have that much authority over children of a certain age. So these societies actively and fiercely enforce equality without any authoritarian communist government imposing it on anyone. Meanwhile, they not only value equality, but they also value just as equally individual autonomy, and that's integral to equality. People are expected to obey social rules around equality, about sharing and not being boastful or arrogant, and there are also rules about avoiding conflict and violence. And there are also rules about conservation to keep animal and food populations stable and sustainable. But in general, anyone can do whatever they want. And it's nobody else's business so long as they aren't causing fights or social disruption. For example, whereas there are sex and gender roles and norms in these societies, people who don't conform to these norms normally aren't ridiculed or judged in any way or mistreated for it. And you can look at some of my several episodes on this to have some more details. Now, in our society, we think that it's only natural that there should be inequality because people have unequal skills. Inequality of talent leads to inequality of wealth and power. But we only think this because we completely take for granted our specific system of property rights that our economic system is based on, where you can just accumulate infinite amounts of wealth and own infinite amounts of property, which is only possible because your property rights are backed up by the power of the state and the police and the army. And because of this system, some people with more advantages, usually having had the right parents, but also other advantages like skills and drive and luck, these people will accumulate a lot of wealth in our system. But they can only do it because there's a massive state with a legal system and police and courts and an army to enforce all the property rights and contracts and all the invented intellectual property rights that make these fortunes possible. In an immediate return foraging society, people also differ in skills and charisma and looks and strength, but they have totally different property rules. So these differences don't amount to any big differences in wealth or power, except the kind of power you get from being popular and from being a more attractive sex and marriage partner. In these societies, the rule is that for most property, you can ask for whatever you want from whoever you want, and they're supposed to give it to you unless they're busy using it at the moment. Some Western anthropologists who are used to our notions of property rights were so surprised by the system that they called it tolerated theft. And when it comes to very important property, like meat from big game kills that hunting parties bring in when they're lucky, there's a whole elaborate series of rules on who's entitled to which piece of meat. And these rules are made in order to prevent anyone from getting special preferential treatment. So how did we turn into suck? How did we go from a species that evolved in conditions where extreme equality was not only a fact of life, but something fiercely culturally enforced, to a species where kings and dictators drown in absurd, pointless riches, and billionaires lobby the government to steal food out of the mouths of hungry grandmothers so they could have a few more pennies that they'll never notice? Is it just because hunter-gatherers have better values than we do? Like, is it just because we don't teach our kids right? Not enough raised right men to keep a happy hen? Immediate return hunter-gatherer societies do profess more egalitarian values than we do. But very curiously, in psychology game theory experiments that anthropologists have conducted, where the players are anonymous, People from these societies are often a little bit more greedy than people in other societies, including our society, our super greedy society. So they clearly have the same instincts that we do, except they're probably also tired of having to share everything with everyone on demand all the time, so they like to hoard a little something something when they can get away with it without social repercussions. So values don't explain the giant difference between our society and theirs. And also, like I have explained in several other episodes, values are the product of practical reality. Social structures reflect the relative bargaining power of various groups of people in society, and values end up reflecting those social structures in order to stabilize society, so that we don't keep testing out battles that we're bound to lose. So, as I explained in other episodes, you get so much equality in these hunter-gatherer societies because everyone in these societies has relatively equal bargaining power to begin with, so that everyone can mutually reinforce their equality on everyone else. Once our pre-human ancestors developed projectile weapons, anyone who was too much of a bully could be quickly murdered with a poisoned dart or arrow by even the weakest man or woman. And women who lived in proximity to their relatives and allies could just refuse to have sex with belligerent types. You can't keep a social structure steady without practical reality reinforcing your social structure, and you can't keep values without reality enforcing those values. So why do we show so much greed and so much dominance hierarchy if we come from a background of such egalitarianism? My argument is that we have such a potentially greedy nature precisely because we evolved to exist in such egalitarian conditions. And this might seem really counterintuitive, but it becomes really sort of obvious if you think about our relationship to sugar and fat and exercise. If we look around us, especially in certain parts of the world like the United States or Mexico and Canada to a growing extent, you see a lot of really obese people and a lot of type 2 diabetes and early arterial sclerosis. People don't like to eat healthy foods. We don't like to exercise. And for a lot of people, there's like no limit to how much sugar and junk food we can consume. It's very easy to access. And most of us find it really hard to resist all the really unhealthy, easy to obtain, cheap food like crap that's all over the grocery store and the dépanneurs, or convenience stores as you barbarians like to call them. But no one says that humans are by nature a big fat species and that we're genetically made to have diabetes and die of marshmallow cereal overdoses. When we look at hunter-gatherers, we see that they're in amazing shape and they look like Olympic athletes. And we understand that that is how humans are made to be, more or less. That's why we find fit bodies so attractive in men and women, because it's healthy to be in good shape. We function better, our digestion is better, we're happier, and we wouldn't have survived our first 300,000 years if we'd been as weak and unhealthy as many of us had become in recent decades. But, despite their fitness, hunter-gatherers also crave sugar and salt and fat and relaxation just like we do. A Hadza forager, for example, in Tanzania, will eat an entire beehive when he comes upon one. Honey, wax, bees, and all. Like 10 to 15,000 calories all in one sitting. And he'll also chillax and lie around for a day or two when he gets the chance. But those chances only come on occasion. And they happen in between regular episodes of walking and running and swimming and lifting things for hours and hours each day, especially walking. And also, whenever you find high amounts of sugar in nature, it's wrapped up in a whole lot of fiber, which absorbs the sugar and releases it slowly in our bodies, so we don't get totally knocked out and diabetic and have to pass out, like after you eat a whole box of Lucky Charms in one sitting, which I've been known to do. So most of us understand that we develop these potentially infinite cravings for sugar and fat and salt, because for 300,000 years, we lived in environments where there wasn't enough of this stuff to really harm us. And we had to make sure that we took advantage of them when we came upon them. It's only in the past 70 years or so, in the era of food corporations trying to maximize profit via addiction, that we started to have access to a lot of dense calories without fiber and without having to do much exercise to get those calories. And when that happened, that's when the rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes exploded. Well, this is kind of the exact same thing that happened with dominance hierarchy and wealth accumulation and greed. The difference is that the big change with access to food happened like 70 years ago, so we notice it. But the big changes with regard to dominance hierarchy happened starting 12,000 years ago, and more seriously about 7,000 years ago with the rise of civilizations. So we take that for granted. Human beings originally evolved in a context where there was no real way of accumulating very much wealth, and no real way to get much dominance over anyone. So like with sugar and salt and rest, we did evolve instincts to enjoy what little amounts of this stuff we could get while they lasted. In those rare occasions when someone from a hunter-gatherer society can find themselves in a situation where people need and are seeking leadership, a hunter-gatherer will jump on it while it lasts. Immediate return hunter-gatherer social norms require extreme humility from good hunters and leaders, but they still quietly get prestige and good reputations. And it's always good to want a little more prestige and a little more influence over others when you can, because that prestige and influence will get you sex. And we see in certain places and times, like in Ice Age Europe, you might have had a more long-lasting chance for more pronounced forms of hierarchy. Like we have some evidence of occasional people with prestige jewelry or garments, or some symbolic representations of hierarchy. But in the Stone Age, the climate used to fluctuate so rapidly that you probably couldn't get to enjoy that kind of status for more than a generation before it was back to conditions of equality again. And this would only probably happen in certain circumstances, which I discuss in other episodes. So you jump on these chances while you can, because it won't last very long. And in general, you live under such tight constraints of social equality. There are natural limits on how much you can achieve. You can only have so much sex, and so much food, and so much wealth, and so much influence and power in our ancestral conditions. In hunter-gatherer times, to get influence and power, you had to be very generous, and you had to share and be well respected, and you had to earn a good reputation among your peers. And your influence would die with you. Your children had no way of inheriting it. But then, when you get to the Holocene geological era, and eventually agriculture and sedentary living become possible, and populations start to increase, and competition for resources become more intense, and there's less places to escape to if someone tries to dominate you, well, then it becomes more and more possible to hoard resources and to prevent other people from accessing those resources, and to be able to force those people to render you service in order to get those resources in exchange. So eventually, you get a world ruled by empires and exploitation civilizations, ruling classes milking peasants via the power of the state. Ancient China, ancient Rome, the Mongolian Empire, Alexander the Great, the Russian Empire, medieval Europe, the Arab empires. It's all ruling elites living from the labor of captured peasants via the power of the state. And then eventually get to the modern age with capitalism, and with the state reinforcing your property rights, and with industrialization producing almost infinite amounts of goods to be sold. Well, now there are no limits anymore on how much wealth and power you can accumulate. So you get the age of robber barons, and then enormous slums of people with no property and no land who have to rent their bodies 18 hours a day to factory workers until they break and die. Now eventually these people get organized, and we get some democracy. And people started to take some of the wealth for themselves. But that's been going in reverse since the 1970s. And with the advent of AI, if we don't change the rules of property and ownership, we're going to quickly end up with a tiny elite of trillionaires who own all the AIs and a giant mass of unemployed people. It's just like having too much sugar and not enough exercise is not good for your body, or your mind, or your emotions. Neither is having too much wealth and power. We are built to be surrounded by equals who will put us in our place if we're arrogant or selfish or if we harass and abuse others. But when we become rich and powerful, instead of being surrounded by peers who keep us anchored to reality, we become surrounded by subordinates, sycophants, and yes men who will never tell us the truth about anything, and they'll always be kissing our asses. And if somebody displeases us, we just get them fired or executed or imprisoned, depending on if you're Michael Jackson or the Emperor of Rome. And there are all sorts of studies that show that in a dominance hierarchy, people are miserable, and their level of stress increases, and their level of health declines more and more as you go down the rungs of the hierarchy. And not only is it bad for people lower down in the hierarchy, but the lives of the wealthy, even though they're wonderful in all sorts of ways, well, they also get worse as their wealth increases beyond a certain point as well. Human happiness increases with wealth to a certain extent, but then it starts to decline because you're more and more disconnected from social reality and you have less and less real human relationships. We can think of so many examples of people who kind of drown in their wealth and fame until it destroys them. Like think about Michael Jackson. No one to tell him, hey, you look good. You don't need more plastic surgery. It's not going to fix your problems. Maybe you need a little therapy. Or maybe you need to go get a job or volunteer for people and do something socially useful. Or even someone like Sting. He's not a miserable person, but look at how good he was when he was with the Police and how kind of whack he got when he was solo. Like, still good, but just more whack. There was no one to edit his stuff. While he was in the Police, if he ever wrote lazy garbage, his bandmates, they would just literally punch him in the face. And then after, when he went solo and he became super rich, you don't have any more peers. And if he flops a turd, everyone's like, wow, that's amazing. This is your best stuff. Ooh, it smells great. If you've seen that show, Succession, I think my favorite scene in that show is in the last season where the super zillionaire CEO dad Logan is sitting there talking to his bodyguard, a character who barely says anything for the whole series. And then one day they're at a diner together and the zillionaire guy is having a melancholic moment and he tells the bodyguard, "You're my pal." And the bodyguard says, "Thank you, sire." And then Logan looks at him in the eyes and says, "You're my best pal." And the bodyguard is like, sure, thank you. And you can see he's kind of scared, like, what's he going to do? Is he going to touch my pee-pee now or something? And then Logan starts blathering all of his deep thoughts and philosophies at him. And, like, there's no dialogue. It's just monologue. This guy, Logan, has no real friends. His kids all hate him, and he hates them. And he thinks his best friend is this guy that he pays to follow him around all day. And his idea of sharing an intimate friendship moment is just lecturing to this guy who's paid to just shut up and listen to him and who's kind of afraid of him. And using this guy as a receptacle for his blather. That's what being rich and powerful is. There's this documentary where Warren Buffett, the billionaire investor who recently just retired, he's driving around town, and this guy has billions and billions of dollars. But because the market is down that day, he's going to skip his favorite $3.17 McDonald's breakfast and drive across town instead to get the $2.95 Burger King breakfast across town. Like, he's so rich that he can just buy all the Burger Kings and McDonald's in the world, no problem. But he needs to have some kind of goals in life, some kind of hobbies to give meaning to his existence. So he still drives across town to save 22 cents, like someone from the 1930s. The only reason he's sane is because he walks around pretending he has no money and inventing little struggles and games to give himself a purpose in life. The late founder of IKEA was worth like $60 billion, but he drove around in a 15-year-old Volvo, and he was so mentally ill that he needed to steal salt and pepper packets from restaurants to keep himself occupied, just like Warren Buffett. In a way, these guys are like people today who don't have to exercise or eat well, but who force themselves to go to the gym and eat healthy, except being healthy or unhealthy doesn't deprive millions of people of social services and wealth that could be going into schools and infrastructure and giving Flint, Michigan water after 10 years of drinking poison, the way that being a billionaire wealth hoarder salt and pepper stealer does. And people like this IKEA guy and Warren Buffett are the good guys in the Billionaires Club. Like, they seem normal compared to the many ultra-wealthy people who just become ridiculous teenage boys who want to live forever and have their brains and penises uploaded into android bodies so that they can become autistic sex machines and live forever. And half of them want the end of democracy, and they want to run the world as some kind of dictatorship by 14-year-old business dorks. Peter Thiel was stammering and hemming and hawing the other day when an interviewer asked him if he wanted the human race to continue to exist. Like, he couldn't answer the question. These people would be funny and kind of sad if they didn't have all this money that they could control the lives of tens of thousands of employees and bend the government and the world to their childish whims. And as messed up as these people are, they're actually way better off than most of their kids are, because they actually run companies and have something to do all day, and they started from a normal position in life. But their kids are born into these outer space bubbles and barely ever have a real relationship from infancy. People are paid to take care of them. Some of the most miserable people I've ever met are the kids of extremely wealthy parents. So, to recap, the reason that we see dominance hierarchies throughout these 6,000 years of recorded history, and we see humans acting out with so much infinite greed, is the same reason that we see so much obesity and type 2 diabetes in the industrialized world. And that's precisely because we evolved in an environment where no one is supposed to have access to that much dominance or that much wealth for very long. Just like we're not supposed to have access to that much easy fiber-free sugar and salt and fat all the time. We have all of these impulses: violence, revenge, lust, gluttony, the 7 deadly sins, and such. And these instincts evolved in an environment where they're supposed to be held in check by our peers. You don't act violently and kill everyone all the time, because if you do, that person's relatives will come and get you back. And you have all this lust so that you'll reproduce, but despite your potentially infinite desire, you keep it to consenting partners, because if not, the partner's relatives will come and kill you, and you'll be ostracized. You don't eat infinite amounts of foods because there are only finite amounts of foods to eat. The world we live in doesn't have the constraints that we're evolved to thrive in, that keep us happy. And that's what a good life is, right? The recipe for a happy life is pretty simple. You have some social time, you have some exercise, get some sun, you have some sex, you have some kids, and goals to achieve and struggles to get to those goals. You have all these drives and impulses, and you can only fulfill them so much. And satisfaction in life is about the efforts you make to go and achieve these things. You put in the work and you get the reward. Whether it's getting some tasty food, or getting to have sex with someone you really like, or getting some cool items you've been saving up for, or going on a fun trip with your friends, or buying a house, or whatever it is. And then you're satisfied and you go to sleep, and it's another day with new goals and obstacles and things to achieve. For a while, since the French Revolution or so, we've been moving back towards the conditions that are healthy for us, towards more democracy and more equality. But for the past 50 years or so, inequality has been growing again and gaining momentum. And with the advent of AI, we're about to reach a point where enormous amounts of people will be thrown out of work and made obsolete. And inequality might rise to heights never seen before, where there's a tiny trillionaire elite owning everything and controlling everything, and a smaller class of very wealthy people who gets to buy everything, and then everyone else in the world, like 99% of the world, has nothing. But the fact that this might happen very quickly, like too quickly for people to just get used to it as being just how the world is, while we still have some actual democracy left in our systems of government, this massive and quick change might create a window of opportunity for us as a society to start thinking about different ways of organizing ourselves, including different systems of property rights rules and institutions that would generate results that are more in line with our human nature, that would help bring out the best in us and help us live our best lives, rather than this horrible garbage that we've been living in for the past 6,000 years, where most people are oppressed and hungry, just that a small class of the richest people can live like mentally ill 14-year-old boys who never have to grow up. So, in future episodes, I'll be talking about what kinds of property rights rules and other institutions might be appropriate for human beings in democratic societies in the age of AI and internet and Star Trek mass production. Like, imagine that if AI was somehow owned by everyone together, the fact that it would eliminate a lot of work would just give everyone a lot more free time. Wow, I can work 20 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week. But instead, what's going to happen, because it's owned only by a small amount of people, those people become trillionaires, and everyone else becomes homeless and starves to death. And we'll also have to start talking about strategies for getting us there. Until then, see ya!